Clayton, what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about the concept that we always find what we're looking for in life. However, what we're looking for isn't always what we want.
Mhm.
And this is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're trying to create the relationship that we want or the business that we want, the lifestyle that we want, because we're often looking for things and looking for evidence of things that don't support us in actually getting what we consciously want. And it really invites us to slow down and get curious as to exactly what's going on there.
Totally. And this is such an interesting concept because when most people are thinking about the way that their life is unfolding, a lot of times it kind of has this flavor of like I'm just noticing, I'm just like observing reality as it is. I'm just noticing things the way that they are. And I think one of the really interesting things about this kind of a conversation is that we start to maybe open up the possibility that we aren't observing things as they are, but that we are observing things as we are. And that I think is a really powerful realization to come to and belief that we can hold as far as
Yes.
impact in the world.
Yeah. And I can't wait to double click on that and open that up more around that. We're actually observing the world as we are rather than seeing it the way we think it is. And I think that can be such a trip to wrap our head around because it just seems like, okay, well, there's this objective world out there and I'm seeing things and I'm seeing mean people, I'm seeing dangerous people, I'm seeing loving people, I'm seeing situations that are trying to take advantage of me. I've seen the limitations of where, maybe regardless of how much willpower I put into it, something can't change or I can't shift something in my life. And this is an invitation for a moment just to try on in this episode that perhaps who you are as a projector screen and that the
Oh,
originating image that you're looking at is actually created from within and then reflects outward. And that if we're trying to then work with the thing outside of us and change and control our environment outside of us, it's like trying to fix a reflection or the image in a mirror rather than go,
yeah, like rubbing against the mirror rather than,
right,
I got dirt on my
right,
face. Let me go try to rub it off the mirror. Like, it's never working.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and I think this is a really interesting concept too, because what you were just saying, like intuitively, it does seem like there is an objective reality. Like we want to say, like, I'm seeing
Yeah.
bad people, I'm seeing dangerous people, I'm seeing loving people. Like I'm not making that up. Like I'm not
Mm.
creating those things. Those things are out there already, whether or not I was there to observe them. That's what the intuition says. I think that's what it seems like for us to be in
Yeah.
the experience of reality. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's useful for us to maybe make a case for this because it is so counterintuitive to see this as a possibility that we are the ones that are kind of the creators of our reality. That I think it might be useful for us to kind of double click and get some, like, tell a story that makes sense for people about how they can come to believe this. I think you
Mm.
were mentioning more that there's an NLP way of looking at it, like a model of NLP, that there was a way of looking at this. Is that going to share
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Sure. So I'm going to fumble my way through this, but essentially, there's a presupposition in NLP that we're never actually directly contacting reality. So there's the outside world as it is, and then our five senses are coming into contact with this external world. And we're playing right now, by the way, for anybody that's listening here that understands quantum physics and the difference between quantum reality and Newtonian reality, we're for a moment just going to play in the world and say that this is a Newtonian way of understanding this, where there actually is an objective world. There's hard things out there that we're coming into contact with, but our senses are creating their first interpretation of them. Okay. Our senses taking the information, and then we have a meaning making function on top of that, then that sorts through the sensory data and begins to create meaning and patterns and uh, crystallizes an understanding that then we make another meaning about that experience, which then turns into language and how we talk about something. And
Mhm.
so we're never actually having a real direct contact with reality. We're having a contact with our experience of our sensory input of reality. And so if we
Yeah.
can just start to see the gap in between that, we can see that in some ways, being in contact with reality is like a game of telephone where things
Exactly.
can get distorted and deleted and generalized very easily to where we're living our life and we start to relate to our beliefs about the world as if it's real, as if it's true. And this is how we can get locked up. This is how we can be in situations that are um, going on a repeat over and over again. And many times it's so that we can survive and create situations that we're familiar with, that we feel certain around, and maintain identity coherence, meaning that we have a very clear idea of who we
Oh,
are
we are.
and
Yeah.
how the world works. And that keeps us safe. But unfortunately, it it actually blocks us from certain levels of thriving and aliveness and being able to take on and create something new in the realm of uncertainty.
Yeah, totally. And I just want to repeat that because I think it's such an important part of what you said and kind of make it clear and distinct that we don't actually have. I mean, everybody listening to this will at least know and be able to understand this part of it. We don't actually have interface with reality. We only have interface with our sense data about reality, like what our touch tells us, what our sound tells us, what our sight tells us. Um, One thing that I really like to think about as like kind of a thought experiment around this is that there are ways of experiencing that we actually don't have access to about the quote unquote reality that's around us. So, dogs can hear pitches that we can't, or, bats have a way of quote unquote seeing that we don't with sonar that we just like, we can't even literally, you can't even imagine what that would be like because that would be requiring images and bats don't have access to images the way that we do. You know what I mean? And so there's all this kind of data that exists out there in the universe, you might say, that we literally have zero access to because it's not in the format, in the narrow band of awareness that we can possibly access of our sense data, which is like sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and proprioception. And so if something doesn't come to us through one of those channels, we don't, we can't quote unquote see it, you know?
Yes.
And I think that's a really useful thing to understand.
That is a super useful thing to understand. Um, and we can take that same model and we can apply it one layer up now to beliefs. That there are literally things that we can't see if we don't believe them. There are certain things we will not be able to witness in other people if we don't already have a belief structure around that to filter for that thing. So just like our senses, right? We have a certain amount of data that comes in that's limited to our five senses. There's a way in which the data, the infinite data that's out there, comes in and we filter it through an already existing belief paradigm, a set of glasses that we're seeing reality through. And it's as real as day. Like, okay, this is just how life is. And so that just brings us to this point that we've discussed last time, though, is that try on for a moment that evidence is infinite regardless of what direction you're looking in. So if you are looking for reasons as to why the world is dangerous, you can find infinite evidence for that. If you're looking for reasons as to why people can't be trusted, you will find infinite evidence for that. If you're looking for reasons why people can be trusted, or why they're loving at their core, you'll find evidence for that. And so then this becomes, and then I'd love to hear what you think about this, it becomes a navigation where, as perhaps a coach or someone who is looking to intentionally design their life and design who they are being in this lifetime, it's not about what's necessarily looking for what's true, because we can find evidence everywhere to
Exactly.
support that truth. It's about what is going to be the most useful frames that we can put on, that we can look for evidence for, that support us as scaffolding that we can move in the direction that we want to move in.
Hallelujah. Because that truth thing, and people get hung up on truth. Like, oh, well, like I want to be lying to myself. And it's like, well, brother, you can't help it. Whatever story you're telling about the reality is
Mm,
by necessity going to be a limited telling of reality. It is not
mm,
going to be all encompassing because we don't have access to all encompassingness. And it's like, I think it's just really useful for us to understand that just let go of the idea of truth because truth isn't a kind of thing that we have access to. Again, that's reality. That's that reality level
mm.
where there's infinite data and we don't know what infinite data is. So any version that you're telling of reality is by necessity going to be limited and therefore not the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mm.
Can't possibly be that.
Yes, I love it. I would say in a very similar way. And I think that a distinction might be that you might have what feels true for you. But what you're saying, just to distinguish this, is you're talking about like the whole truth. Can you actually have access to the entirety of truth? And it's like, if we're searching for that, I think we're in a fool's errand at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for me, the thing about it is it's like the pursuit or the attempt to be consistent with the truth. Again, it's a fool's errand. And we're going to waste a lot of energy on that for something that we can never know one way or the other. Because again, I mean, we don't have like perfect record keeping because we don't have perfect data in the first place. We don't have access to all the data. You think about like the way that police sketch artists go and they like take images after the fact and the way how those things don't look the same as they did once you even find the person that they're sketching. Like it's not the same person as in the picture, or people will remember a car being green versus red or things like that. This is all like the very nature of our subjective experience in the world,
Yeah.
our subjective interpretation of the world that we have. And then to tell ourselves the story that that's true, that it's some fact about the world is just not useful. Now, it's not to say that there aren't facts, and I want to make a distinction here because there are certain kinds of things that they're true inherently. And so like mathematical truths, for instance, if you understand the way that what the words mean of math, 2 plus 2 can't not equal 4. It's inherent within the meanings of the words. Or like you can't have a square circle, for instance, because it's inherent within the meanings of the words. These are things that are called like tautologies in philosophy, things that are like they're true by virtue of themselves. You know the meanings of the words, then there's a lot of things that they also mean. But that's a very limited subset of the kinds of things that we're talking about in the world. Most of
Yes.
the time, we aren't talking about mathematical or logical truths, and we're talking about the
Yes.
truth about what he said or what she said or some situation that
Or
happened.
someone's actions.
Especially someone's intentions. Like, think about that. Well, what he meant when he said that was blah, blah, blah. You hear people talk this way, but how
Yeah.
could you possibly have any idea what somebody meant? You could maybe
Yeah.
have an experience of what they said that they meant. But even then, perhaps they could be lying or misremembering or, any number of things. So we can't possibly know what they meant in any
Yeah.
situation. We can't even necessarily really know what we meant in the situation.
Yeah.
So it's very
Yeah. And
complicated, but
to add another piece of this, I see us speaking to the kind of overarching meta structure of the beliefs that really drive how people show up, which are life is what dot dot dot. People
Mhm.
are what dot dot dot. Or I am dot dot dot. Like trying to find the truth of that, like life is this, or people are that, or I am this, and then to have it limited to one small sliver of something, like this is where how useful is it to really find these interpretations and intentionally create these interpretations that are going to serve you in how you want to show up in the world? The piece that I wanted to just navigate the conversation into is what are the implications of this? Like, what does this actually mean uh, about moving through the world and being somebody who is loving themselves and able to create and able to surrender and able to have an enjoyable, enlivened, self expressed journey? And I think what it actually points to is that who we are being is primary and what we do and what we have is secondary. And the reason for that is the world is essentially reflecting who we're being. So this goes back to what you were saying earlier, is that the world out there is more of a reflection of us than we are of it. And so
Mm.
if there's something that I have a belief about people out there, where I have a belief about myself and I'm seeing evidence of it out in the world, it's reflecting my being. It's reflecting who I'm being. Like I am being that the world is dangerous. I am that other people are not trustworthy. I am that other people can't be counted on. Now, like notice just the effect that it's going to have on my availability and capacity to be in a relationship, capacity to lead, capacity to take risks. The world is reflecting that being. And so if we can bring this back to ourselves and say, okay, who are we being that people are XYZ? Who am I that life is XYZ?
Yeah, can you double click on this? Because I think
Yeah.
the language that you're using, we might want to help people hear it. So when you're saying like who am I being that
Yeah.
X is the way that the world is, or something like that. Can you double click on what does that mean? Who am I being?
Yeah. Great questions. Another great way of talking about this that has been explaining to me that I love is looking at it as an inner stance. What is the inner stance that I'm taking? What is the perspective or the location that I'm choosing to stand in and look at the world through? What are the thoughts? What are the feelings? What are the things that I'm telling myself? What are the belief structures, the things that I'm choosing to believe that make up this kind of mosaic of my being that then I'm filtering the world's infinite data through? So being is in some ways like a nominalization for the positioning of our interpretive systems.
Might we say the perspective that we're taking?
Yeah. What would you add to that? Because I know that you know this language as well.
Uh,
Anything that you would say to complete the picture there?
well, I think that's really great. Actually, there's like this quick story that I want to tell. So I had a party on Friday with my friends. He was talking about Ender's Game, and in Ender's Game, I'm not going to go deep into it, but there's this part where Ender, they're playing a game and they're in zero gravity. And Ender, as they're going in to play this game in this arena, he says the gate is down. So the goal that we're trying to get to is down. And so everybody on his team then shifts their perspective because everybody was thinking about like kind of meeting across a football field, so to speak. But then all of a sudden, because they're in zero G, Ender had his team think of it as down. And so then his whole team now immediately had the high ground always in their perspective. And so they were then at an advantage. And it was only because of a shift that they made in the way that they looked at the world. Because they were in zero gravity and they started to think of the gate as being down. Well, now the team that was facing them is now pointing at their feet, the bottoms of their feet. And they have the bronze side of them in their shooting or whatever.
Yes.
And so this idea, I think this is the essence of kind of what we're talking about here is that there's a way that we can look at the world differently. And because we look at it differently, all of a sudden things get easier.
Yes.
When
Okay.
we do
That's
that.
beautiful. Let me share a story from my life that is being catalyzed by this movie, right? It's a movie or is it?
Yeah, it was both. Ender's Game was a book and then a movie.
Okay, great. Yes. This shift in perspective then all of a sudden instantly changes the game, that changes the way in which one shows up to the game. You know, when I look at my own life and some of the work that I've done with really amazing therapists and really amazing coaches, two realizations that I have had that were so artfully and gracefully brought to my attention that occurred to me as so much more useful. And they actually occurred to me as so much more true. Now, were they the true? That's arguable, but let's just say that it felt so much better in my system and it felt so much more truer to me. And the first one is that it wasn't my fault around the things that happened to me as a kid. Number one, it wasn't actually the neglect or some of the emotional abuse that could have occurred in the household growing up wasn't because there was something inherently flawed with me or because I was broken in some way, but rather it was actually damage being passed downstream from lineages of from my parents to my parents' parents or their parents' parents, where I'm now collecting this kind of ancestral pain and blaming myself. And who knows if I stay unconscious, that could get passed down to my kids as well. So that was one thing is just actually realizing that it wasn't my fault, that there
Mhm.
was damage done to my parents that I was simply in the blast radius of as a child, which exonerated me from taking responsibility for that type of event. And then the second thing that shifted my perspective massively was also simultaneously seeing not only their imperfection, but also how powerful they were and how they were truly doing the best that they could and that they were energetic, spiritual powerhouses in their own right, even though they didn't do things perfect. And that I actually had the strength and the foundation of their consciousness behind me, pushing me deeper into life so that I could go live a life of thriving.
Mm.
These kind of perspectives completely change and it almost like straighten out a relationship that I had with myself and a relationship in which I felt like, should I forgive my dad? Should I,
Mm.
how can I forgive him? Am I being put at a disadvantage? And it like just straightened out all of that stuff.
What does that free you to in the world?
What does that free me to do? It frees me to show up much more, one, self-expressed, and two, to feel like there is a energy or a momentum that is pushing on my back pushing me into the next chapter of life, the next chapter of maybe my own lineage in a forward direction with family that is truly behind me, who did the best that they could with the resources and the awareness that they had. That it wasn't some type of, fall from grace growing up in the family and that I was already inherently flawed and then damaged, but rather that everything happened the best way it possibly could have, given the circumstances. And now I'm free to individuate from them and to go create my own life and break that pattern and approach life with a higher level of consciousness, maybe an upgrade with the family name.
Nice. And you could imagine people hearing that and being like, yeah, that would be really useful for me in my life if only I were able to do that. And that's the reason that we're doing this belief work. That's the reason that we're shading on this thing. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier with these beliefs. It's like, this is why cold reading works, by the way, like tarot or palm reading or astrology. The reason it works is because it's speaking in generic enough terms that we all can find those things in ours. Like if I tell you, for instance, that what I'm seeing in your palm tells me that you're a really confident person. Okay. Well, what you're going to do inside your mind is go and find evidence
Mhm.
of you being a confident person. And then you're going to try to assemble that in your mind, right? Because we can all find times when we're confident and times when we're not confident. Both states are true, quote
Yes.
unquote, but neither state is the whole truth. But if I'm believing that I'm a confident person, well, now how am I going to show up at that next meeting? How am I going to show up on that next sales call? How am I going to show up on my next date? How am I going to show up with my friends playing whatever sport I want to go play? Like, if I'm
Yeah.
believing that I'm a confident person, then all of a sudden I start to behave like a confident person. That's cool. That's useful in the world. And so that's why we're doing this messing with beliefs, not just because of
Yeah.
sort of psychic masturbation. It's because it frees us up to be some way in the world that we want to be showing up. And that
Mhm.
is really, really fucking cool.
Yeah. And it seems like it could be as simple as, okay, well, just tell yourself that you are something and then go act that way and be it. And on some level, it can be that simple, but oftentimes what creates real alignment on these multiple levels, going deeper and deeper in the personality, is finding the belief that you want to believe is true, the thing that you want to see as true about reality, and then going on a evidence scavenger hunt for that thing,
Nice.
looking all over your life, past and present, for where that thing actually exists and how it is actually expressing itself and how it's already there, a part of you. And you actually don't need to go add anything to you. You just need to realize the truth of it within yourself. And I think this is where really good coaching, really good therapy, really good mentorship is.
Even really good journaling if you can,
Yeah.
find it. Yeah.
Yes. Because it helps us recontextualize our past story and start to pull out these nuggets of these, because, we are everything. We have all of these aspects of ourselves. And to have somebody reach in and pull these things out and create an alignment internally through our storyline and bring us into that realization, that's what creates the coherence, so that when we go out in the world, we don't feel like an imposter necessarily. Feel like, oh, wow, like, no, this is actually who I am. This is who I've been being. And we let ourselves off the hook and we start to see ourselves in a more useful way. That's the invitation. Yeah, that's the invitation. It's just to like play with this like an artist and realize that maybe for like the next 21 to 30 days, you could run an experiment and just take what you're hearing in this podcast and act as if what we're talking about might actually be how the world works. And that whatever it is that you think is true might not be. It might not be. And that there might be a completely different frequency or flow that you can step into that will yield a brand new paradigm that you can live into by simply pausing and getting curious about what it is that you want and maybe what it is that you might have to believe to get that thing that you want. Let's try that on as a thought experiment. And then if you want any help, you want any professional support, you can either contact Ben or I. We'd be happy to dive into a deeper dialogue around that.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is really good, man. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and for going through this stuff today. I think it's really helpful. I think this would be
You
worth
too, man.
many, many more podcasts in the future too, just to talk about it in different ways, because really like understanding that our belief system is the most important thing in any kind of transformation work that we're doing and anything that we want to create in the world. So thanks so much for going through this today and many, many future returns. Thanks so much for listening to the Shift to Freedom podcast. If you want to get the most out of your time here, think about this. What's the one thing from this episode that resonated the most for you? Asking that simple question can help anchor in your insights and remember who you want to be. If there was even a single thought in today's episode that helps you to become even 1% more free, then we are thrilled. If so, would you do us a favor? We're on a mission to spread the message of freedom, and we could use your help. See, the algorithms love it when we get reviews, shares, comments, and likes, and then that helps other people like you to find the podcast and just maybe change their lives. So if you like what we're doing and you want to generate some positive karma for the day, please write us a review wherever you get your podcast love. See you next week, and in the meantime, live your freedom and love your life.